Hello. In this video, I'd like to discuss the um, issue of where the energy stored in the mainspring in a Luger. Okay, where does it go when the slide or with the toggle train basically, let it go and the slide moves forward? I'll be referring to the barrel and the barrel extension as the slide. This is the toggle train here. This is the locking bolt. And so where does that energy go? Well, we're going to see that energy that is supplied by the spring, that comes from the compressed spring, is going to be dissipated as heat in the form of friction, as collision that would transfer to the shooter's hand, and as sound. Then you could have, noticed this, essentially. Here it is. And if I let this slide go, there is a significant amount of sound. All right, so that's energy dissipated. Now, there is energy storage that goes from the spring into the extractor spring, and into the ejector leaf spring over here. Okay. When we move this back, the toggle, you see that this leaf spring goes in. I don't know if you can see it here. It's tip over there. Okay. So it releases some of its energy, and that helps extract the eject the brass. And when this goes down, the block, the breech block, there's a spring here. So this extractor is going to hold on one of the back of one of the rounds, and there is some effort needed to pull it up and close it a bit on the back of the shell, basically, or the round. Okay, so this is energy stored. So when this goes down, the leaf spring is going to move out. So it's basically pushed, and that stores a little bit of energy. The spring here in the extractor will have some energy stored in it, but those are typically small amount of energy. This would be relatively higher, the energy in this spring of the extractor, than the energy stored in the leaf of the ejector component. Okay, so I'm gonna put this bullet in. We have 8 rounds in the magazine. We'll get back to that. And we know that some of that energy is going to be spent, and this, this is significant work, requires to take this slide back about 2/8 of an inch. So that's significant. And so when a round is fired, okay, this slide will come back, and once those ears here hit the ramp here, they're going to move up. Okay, and then it's gonna fall on the next round in the magazine, and it's going to chamber that round. So we know some of the energy goes here, and actually it ends up, when this returns, you see that sound? That's the collision between the locking bolt here, it's inside face, and the lug on the base of the slide, which we'll look at in a minute. Okay, so now what are the relative, that energy that's released? What's significant and what's not that significant in the operation when this thing goes down. Okay, so let's take a look at that, and again, qualitatively, I will discuss how much work my hand is going to do in order to resist the motion, and that will give us an idea of how much energy is being dissipated by the various mechanisms. All right, so I'm going to basically take the side plate out, and I'm going to take the toggle train out. So that leaves us, obviously this here I'm not going to take out, and this ejector spring leaf, we'll keep it in. So it takes a little bit of effort here, to push it out. Okay. And this is the locking, the extension lug that we're talking about. And that's what basically is held. This is how the upper doesn't basically disengage or leave the frame. It's because of this face of the lug over here. Okay, so that lug basically, its face is gonna hit there, and that's the sound you're hearing. And essentially, this is like hitting two billiard balls sitting next to each other. You hit one of them, they're touching each other, you hit one. Essentially, the second one will move, get most of that energy or all of that energy in a perfect collision, and the first doesn't move. So the energy is transferred. And that's why this locking bolt really lasts and it doesn't get really crushed, because that force is gonna hit, here you can see it, its face over here, is gonna hit the front of the frame, and that is going basically to be absorbed by the shooter's hand. So not all that energy will go into really the frame. It'll also get mostly transferred to the shooter's hand or arm, if you like. Okay. So now, so how much energy does it take to move? Okay, to move the slide. Now the slide is relatively heavy. Okay, and it really doesn't really take that much energy if we're just encountering the friction. If it wasn't for the friction, it'll just slide with a minimal effort, essentially. And this only moves this much, about 2/8 of an inch. Okay, so there's really not much energy expended basically moving the slide. Now, one thing you have, but then you might say, oh, but there's a heavy mass that you're moving. Well, basic physics tells us that if you have a body, okay, once you counter the friction force, then you need no additional force for that mass to keep moving at a fixed velocity. And this is the concept of spaceships. Basically, they conserve energy. You don't need to run the rockets. Basically, you turn them off once you're in outer space, and the spaceship basically is at a given velocity. You stop the engines and keep going at that velocity because there is no friction, and there is no work need to be done, because the force from the rockets is zero, so there is no force. And we know that work, or energy in joules, is the force applied on the spaceship or on the mass times the displacement, the distance. And if the force is zero, then there is no energy being expended here. So that's important. But if there is friction, then we have to have a force that cancels the friction, okay, that stays on the object, and that times the distance moved, which is the 2/8 of an inch in this case, okay, times the friction to counteract the force that counteracts the friction on the upper here, is basically the energy expended. Now, of course, the mass doesn't come into the equation, but the mass, if you're accelerating an object, then the force is the mass times the acceleration. So if you have changing velocity or acceleration, then the mass plays a role in determining the amount of mass required to maintain that acceleration. So that's important. A constant velocity, if you don't have the friction, you don't need a force to be applied to maintain, regardless of the weight of the object, to maintain its constant velocity. If there's friction, then we have some small amount of work. Now, when this goes down, though, it's not going at a constant velocity. It's accelerating till it hits the log. Okay, so it accelerates, and there is acceleration. So the mass come into play, and there is an energy dissipation because of that. So there's an energy that builds up from the spring into the kinetic energy of the slide, and then that kinetic energy, boom, once it hits the locking bolt, it goes into the frame. The shooter's hand is like impulsive, so it's dissipated that way through sound, heat, and some of that energy goes into the shooter's hand, trying to maintain the gun. Okay. Now let's go to the slide. So you know the toggle train, okay? So you know there's some effort here to basically move the firing pin and ultimately lock in it so it can, the sear can, you know, engage it or basically release the firing pin. So there's some significant energy, as can be seen over here. Now this is loose and this has some weight to it. If we put this back in here, okay, now let's see how much energy or work does it take to take an open toggle and move in it. Okay, there we go. Okay, the open toggle like this. So the only thing that's really preventing this from falling down and sliding forward is really the friction. Okay, and there's also the force that this ejector is placing on the block over here, okay, the breech block. So here, you know, it's just some friction, and that friction is the friction with the tight slide, the rails here. It's also friction at this pin and friction at this other pin over here. If that friction wasn't there, and if I'm to remove this and assume theoretically there's no friction, essentially this will fall on its weight because there's a gravitational force pushing down. It'll have a horizontal component that will slide this in. So in a perfect world, really, there's no springs here, you know, it's just this will fall if the friction was zero. But the friction is not zero, so it's going to take some energy from the mainspring into moving the toggle train basically into the locking position like that. Okay? All right. So when this moves basically down, some energy from the mainspring is going to be transferred to this leaf spring, the ejector. Okay, so some of the energy is going to be stored there. So that's not dissipated energy, but stored energy. And when a bullet here, I have some dummies here. When the slide goes in, again, there is some stored energy in the extractor spring, basically that lifts up, and you see the indicator here. Okay, when you move it out, you basically eject it like that. Okay, so I have some small stored energies that are transferred from the mainspring into, as we saw, the ejector and the extractor spring. But otherwise, and there's friction to put this back. You see, friction to put this back, and I mean, and then you have you need to set the spring to compress the spring for the firing pin. So once you reach this point, there's easy slide over here. Once you push, this will take a little bit effort to do it, okay? And then if you, okay, so this has nothing in it. If you push on this here, okay, anyways, you can shoot the gun. The firing pin would go, and what you heard is basically the energy transferred from the firing pin. Obviously, some of it is going to go into the cap over here, and the sound that you heard. Now we can take this out, obviously, and you can see that the firing pin, if I take it out, okay, and put this back in, let's see if I can align this easily. It shouldn't be that hard. Okay, you see, this almost, if you didn't have the friction and the tightness here from the fork on the bolt, on the breech block, this would just fall. Okay, so there's no resistance. The only effort is really that friction and this extractor pushing on the side of the breech block. All right, so what else should we be looking at? Okay, so where does some of the other energy go? So I'm gonna put the gun back, and I'm going to disengage the you know, the link here. I'm not gonna take it in front of the fork. I'm just gonna slide it out like that. Okay, so by doing that, you can see you shoot, slide, moves back slightly, short distance. The ears here, they hit the ram, and they lift, and it opens. You know, not much of an effort to put it back. Okay, the only thing like now is really this ejector spring forcing, you know, pushing on the side of this block. That's what I have to put some little bit of work to move it, but otherwise there's nothing here. You see, that doesn't take much of an effort to move it. So some energy is going to be dissipated there in terms of friction and the sound you hear, but it's not that significant. But obviously, once you put the firing pin back, then there is some bit of significant, not, you know, energy that need to basically compress the firing pin, the spring here. Okay, now what I'm going to do is to disassemble and see where is also some significant energy would go. So far we saw the significant energy that will get dissipated or transferred or radiated as a sound wave is in the energy stored in the spring of the firing pin upon the return of the slide. Okay, and the sound that we heard, the collision of the log with the locking bolt over here, and that impulsive energy here that goes in sound absorbed by the front of the frame, and I'd say a significant part of it will go into the hand of the shooter. Okay, now there's also one more significant component of energy dissipation. So I'll put this back in. Okay, put the slide back. By the way, this is a nice 1911 DWM. Nicely unit marked. Okay, so let's put this back in. Align it. Put the axle. Sometimes this can be tricky. Okay, here we go. Okay, and I'm gonna put this back. So everything is the same way you would assemble it, except that, again, I'm avoiding engaging the mainspring. Okay, so this is behind. This link is behind. It's not engaging the mainspring. Okay. Okay. There we go. I locked it. So essentially, there's no, mainspring acting on it. The effort I have to put, again, you see, like light, light, light. Now, this is the effort I need to put for the firing pin spring to contract, basically, to set. Okay? And now, if we put a mag fully loaded with those dummy rounds, and I take this down, you see, it's going to take some effort, especially when the mag is, has several rounds in it. It's going to take some effort, you see, to shove that round into the chamber, and then followed by, so see, this is not that much of an effort to move the slide forward, and then followed by another effort, to just completely move the slide off the ramp into the chamber, and then now the force that is going to go, you see, into the ejector spring and into setting the spring of the firing pin. So those are the three significant mechanisms that really dissipates the energy. It's in the shoving or moving around from the top of the mag into the chamber, the work needed to compress the firing pin spring, and those are about the same. I'd say from a full loaded magazine, the first round, second round would take even more effort than the one that's needed for setting the firing pin spring or compressing it. And then the last part is the log, the slide log hitting the locking bolt, and you hear that sound, and whatever energy is left is dissipated. And when we're in this state, the spring hasn't completely released its energy, because you need some force. Okay, some force. Again, we cannot demonstrate it because the link is not attached to the spring, but once we attach it, so let's do that. Eject around. Disassemble. Now put the link back in. Okay, you see here. Okay, we're successful. Putting this back in. Side plate, locking it. So you see now, this is the amount of pressure or force on the slide to keep it fully forward, basically. Okay, so I hope this have kind of shed some light into where that energy goes, where does it get stored, where does it get dissipated, how is it dissipated, where does it go, and the significance of which are the significant mechanisms that dissipates that mainspring energy. I hope you find it useful. Thank you for watching.